Good afternoon. I'm Cayla Morningstar, and I'm with the Nonindigenous Aquatic Species Database of the United States Geological Survey. Today, I'm going to talk about our project in which we are mapping native gastropod hotspots with occurrences of non-indigenous gastropods and their main vectors in the conterminous United States. To start, I would like to familiarize you with the Non-Indigenous Aquatic Species, or NAS, database if you are not already familiar with our website. The NAS database is the foremost repository for non-Indigenous aquatic species in the United States and U.S. territories. We track obligate aquatic species, including fish, mammals, invertebrates, plants, amphibians, and reptiles. We track what we call exotic species, which are species from outside of the U.S., and native transplants, which are U.S. species that have been moved out of their historic ranges. In this talk, I'll refer to them both as non-indigenous species. We have interactive maps that show the distribution of non-indigenous species occurrences, species profiles with information about natural history, invasion history, and impact information for non-indigenous species, as well as tools for managers that can inform early detection and rapid response. This project is to inform those early detection and rapid response efforts. The NAS database tracks 39 freshwater gastropod species with over 9,600 records of these species currently. Records come from museum collections, literature, agency reports and communications, and citizen science reports, which we independently verify. Currently, our team is working to aggregate all documented reported impacts for the species we track, and for gastropods, we have found a range of impacts, including infrastructure, human health, habitat alteration, water quality, and of course, ecological impacts such as competition, parasites, and food web changes. As we aggregate these documented impacts, we have found that one of the most influential impacts that non-native snails can have on an ecosystem are their impacts to native snails. Here are just a few examples of documented impacts in which non-indigenous snails species influence native gastropod species, including outcompeting native species for space and resources, altering their behavior, spreading exotic parasites, and predation. We decided that given this threat, we would like to use our mapping and non-indigenous species data and vector information to help inform managers and researchers of areas where this threat is most prevalent to aid conservation efforts. When considering the ways in which NAS data could be most informative to managers working with native and imperiled gastropods, it became most apparent that areas of high species richness, high endemism, and or imperilment are likely of most interest. Therefore, a hotspot map for native species would be a great tool for plotting the occurrences of non-indigenous impact species. We would need to determine the species most impactful to native snail populations, and also to acquire native gastropod distribution data. Our impact research has identified 7 snail species that have been documented or anecdotally shown to have impacts on native U.S. gastropods. These include the New Zealand mud snail, giant apple snail, Chinese mystery snail, Japanese mystery snail, red rim melania, quilted melania, and the faucet snail. And yes, you see a non-snail species on this list too, the black carp. And while, yes, not a snail, the black carp is a very well-documented molluscivore, and therefore we must include it in this project as a threat to native gastropods as it spreads through the Mississippi Basin. And so here are our 8 impact species, plotted with occurrence data from the NAS database. You can see that some species are in small pockets and some are very regional. In the future, these patterns can be assessed more closely by looking at species vectors by region, as every occurrence point for a specimen in the NAS database has a vector association. Unfortunately, we do not have all these data analyzed for you to see yet today. Obtaining non-indigenous species data is easy for us, as it's what we do. But acquiring native gastropod occurrence data for the more than 700 gastropod species in the U.S. is not an easy feat. Luckily for us, we have a group of great conservation researchers here in the FMCS community that have published the known gastropods of North America. Using the species from the Johnson et al. 2013 paper as a guide, as well as the amendments published with FMCS in 2019, we can pool the species occurrences for all known native gastropods within the conterminous U.S. from museum collections. In order to gather museum data quickly and effectively, the first resource we are using is GBIF, the Global Biodiversity Information Facility. In general, GBIF is an international data infrastructure network that allows data-holding institutions to share information. Many museums upload their information to GBIF, so by pooling data from GBIF, one can pull data from a number of facilities at once. This is a time-effective way to gather a lot of data. There are parameters in the database which you can set to be sure that the data you are pooling fits your needs and weed out potentially problematic specimens. After pulling the data for all the species, we uploaded the CSV files to ArcGIS to verify that the data present for each species did not have any outliers that would signal an incorrect latitude or longitude. With any data aggregation and museum collection, there are issues, such as incorrect coordinates, taxa misidentifications, and outdated taxonomy. And the range data for species rather than occurrence point data would be ideal for this project, but generating ranges for so many species would take years and is out of the scope of this project. Here is a map of the GBIF data for the native gastropods. The data points need to be checked and outliers can be pulled out pretty easily using ArcGIS. Since this data is so preliminary, we don't think there are any conclusions we can draw from looking at this map, but I did want to show you the map for the sheer number of occurrence points, which total more than 50,000 records. The next steps in the project will be to gather more data from museums that don't upload data to GBIF. We will also pool the known vectors of the impact species based on area. There are a lot of ways to solve the issue of data gaps, one of which is to gather more information from other data aggregators. The more native species data that is gathered, the more the map will most accurately reflect the species richness in the US. There are also more ways we could attempt to analyze the point data to make it reflect range data, and I am enthusiastically open to any suggestions regarding this topic. And so to summarize, this project is still in its beginning phases, and as this group specializes in gastropod conservation, your input is highly desirable and greatly appreciated. I would like to just emphasize that the non-native species data I showed you today was retrieved from the NAS database externally, and all of the NAS data is available to managers via a CSV download, and custom queries with our maps are very easy to do. The native hotspot map that is created for the gastropods of the US will also be made available as a GIS layer after our publication. Here are the citations I used in this presentation. And with that, I would like to thank you for listening, and I look forward to any questions, comments, and suggestions you may have about this work.